We've been talking about composting all week long. I had such good success with the video I sent out last week, I thought I'd do another one today on composting. I was working in the garden a little bit yesterday and I've come into some new conclusions. Creating compost is really about creating life, and therefore there are steps to complete this process, and they're critical. You got to have a 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, or it's just not going to work. Moisture is also very important. You need 50% moisture. Temperature is also important. The compost must reach between 135 and 160 for it to actually control all the pathogen and the weeds, seeds that's inside the compost. So if you don't get up there, you're not going to get it, which makes your piles a minimum size. You got to have a 3 foot by 3 foot at the minimum to be able to hold the heat and for all this to work. Now if your compost reaches 160 degrees, you got to turn it immediately because it's heading anaerobic. Once that happens, all your nutrients are going to gas out into the air and you're going to kill your microbiology in the pile. So you got to check your temperature every day. You want to make sure and keep it between 135 and 160. Turn your pile when it starts to get up on the higher end and try to maintain it the best you can. Do not think that just piling up organic matter is composting. They are not the same. I piled up mushroom manure about 3 weeks ago and mixed it with sod that I pulled off my pathways out there, and it's still the same today as it was 3 weeks ago. The grass turns a little bit yellow, but it just hasn't decomposed. Wetting is also difficult. I mean, you start a pile out, you think just spraying on some water is going to do the job. But when it comes down to it, it really doesn't. I find it's much more difficult than that. You can't just lay down a layer and spray it off. Get your shovel, chop up the layer, work it back and forth until your water gets down in it to make sure that it's wet. Now, the other thing I'm finding is probably with a lack of organic matter, you really have trouble wetting it down. It's almost like cement, where it's too dry, and then all of a sudden it's too wet. I think as you increase your organic matter, that things will get better. What I found out is my pile never heated, so I had the wrong carbon to nitrogen ratio. And I didn't have it wet either. It was dry. As I turned it over yesterday, the pile still looked dry. I'm not breaking down the clumps. There's still sod in there. I hope I learned a trick from the Biochar people, some links I sent out this week. What they did to get their biochar to become activated so that it had the biology in it, they added just plain old white flour to their pile. So we had some old white flour here, and as I turned my pile over yesterday, I added some to it. We'll see if it works. I'm not sure. The time alone doesn't make soil. Soil is grown by those willing to learn what's required and to do the work. Right now it appears that all I have is just mulch, and I suspect that's what you guys are doing year after year, putting mulch down and thinking it's going to make soil. It takes a farmer to make soil. It doesn't happen on its own. So I'm going to go outside and we're going to take a look at some mulch. We're out in the garden now, so I'm going to give you a look at the compost pile and see how we're doing today. I finished piling it all up yesterday, kind of changed it over, and I watered it like I told you a little bit ago, and I've added the flour to it. So let's take a look at inside and see how it's doing. There's my thermometer. You can see what the temperature is right now. And take a look at the little hole I've dug. There's just no life in there at all. Now the one thing that I do have is, now there's some moisture in it. If you could squeeze it, you could almost start to see a little bit of moisture coming out of it. At least it clumps together. It's a lot better than it was. So let's take a look at what the temperature is inside the pile. There's the internal temperature of it. So it's up a couple degrees, but not anything like it should be. Stephanie put this pathway in 12 years, maybe 15 years ago, and every year she mulches it. I want to bring you down to a hole I dug in it. There is absolutely no life down in that hole at all, and the ground is just dry, crack. We see some leaves or some roots down in there, but it is just clumpy clay. There's nothing nice about it. You can see the last couple years it's still just, it's mulch. It has not decayed, it has not turned into soil. I'm of the opinion that just adding a bunch of mulch on top of the ground is not going to fix our problem. What I'm trying to show the difference is, if you do have soil, plant matter will quickly decompose. If you don't have soil, it will not decompose. I have nothing really to compare quickly to, so I need more of a scientific route. So I'm thinking about using a microscope. By looking at soils, I can verify, and that's by actually seeing it and by counting it, and to see if there's any biology in my soil. There's a lot of information about soil available on the internet. And you know, we've checked out Paul last week and his ideas on mulch, and we've checked out Gabe and his ideas on cover crop, and then I also sent you some stuff on biochar and how important many people think that this charcoal is to soil. And then I sent out Dr. Elaine's stuff about 2 weeks ago, and you know, all these people are looking at different aspects of making good soil. I think what Elaine is saying is that the correct way that all of this works, if you have fungi and bacteria and little creatures, they make soil. Everybody else is getting around this by using their own different techniques. But the truth of the matter is, if you want to grow something live, it takes the right environment and food and care to make it happen. And that's what I want to work on. Now, to look at soil, it's going to take a microscope and a whole new set of skills. As I research into this, I'm finding out that it's just as important that we look at our own blood as we look at soil, because there's a lot of things to learn in there. There is much to see in both. I'm also seeing that because of the importance in blood Christology, a whole system of profit making and fraud has taken over it. When I first started looking at blood, I couldn't understand why every doctor doesn't draw a sample of blood and look at it. But I don't know why they don't. It doesn't make sense. If I was a doctor, you came in, I'd check you over, I'd pull a sample of blood, I'd look at it and diagnose you. Chiropractors picked up on the importance of all this, but they use it as a profit-making tool, and it destroyed any truth and the credibility of the field. So it's pretty much just been destroyed. So I turned to the field of veterinarian studies, and now there's a lot of good work being done by the vets, and I think that through them I'll be able to find out a whole lot more about blood and how to look at it, how to understand it. But that's what I need to do. If I use a microscope, I'll be able to give you guys a critter count on your soil. If you choose to send it to me, you'll have a good idea of what your soil is, and I'll also be able to work on my own blood. I see that the red blood cells, they change shape, they stick together, they do all kinds of things based on how well you're hydrated, what you're eating in your meals, if you're nutrient deficient, if you're ill, if you have parasites. There's just a huge amount of information being able to find out in the blood. So I got to get a microscope and pick up a new set of skills with it. I'll be talking to you guys soon. Thanks for listening.